To the present hour we hunger and thirst. We are poorly dressed and buffeted and homeless. And we labor, working with our own hands. Remember Paul? At least in Corinth, he did not get a check from the church. Right? And a lot of them didn't seem to like that. Why don't you let us pay you, Paul? No, I'll make the tents. We work with our own hands. When reviled, we bless. When persecuted, we endure. When slandered, we entreat. We have become and are still like the scum of the world, the refuse of all things. Does that sound like guys that are way up here in the hierarchy? Not the way the world thinks of it, but Paul says this is really the way it is. And he doesn't seem to have a problem with that. They are. When he was reviled, what did he do? He blessed, he prayed for. A lot of time he kept silent. And so many, isn't that a sign of weakness in our current culture? Would you tune into a show on TV tonight on cable if everybody just sat around in silence? We tune in to watch them scream at each other, don't we? And fight their point. That's not what the apostles did. So I think even we would have had a problem with the way Paul did things. Why aren't you speaking up for yourself, Paul? We know how smart you are, Paul. Why don't you fight back? No. Because then it would be about his power instead of God's power. Right? And yes. And even, I think, people in the church there, some people in the church, they don't like this. Because they whisper things about Paul's weak. He's sickly, he's not that great a speaker. Why don't you guys hire a different guy? And so he's writing them these letters because he's their father, their spiritual father, and he wants them to believe true things about the Lord and the gospel. He's writing this letter trying to influence them back to him, but it's not going to be based on his personal power and magnetism and all that stuff. It's based on God. I just thought that was an interesting parallel passage there for what we're looking at here. So, any questions or comments on that before we move on? Mm-hmm.
The way that he told them through his whole ministry, and even the disciples that he had, were not learned scholars.
Right.
So they would have been respected anyway.
Common men, fishermen.
Yeah.
Or crooked tax collectors. Yeah. Not respectable men of the cloth. Sure. Okay, verses 14 and 15. I think you ought to memorize these two verses if you don't have them memorized. Because I think you get one of the great summary statements in all the New Testament about what this is all about, what Christianity is all about in verses 14 and 15. Because he says, "For the love of Christ controls us, because we have concluded this, that one has died for all, therefore all have died. And he died for all, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised." In those 2 or 3 lines, you have the whole thing, right? Verses worthy of committing to memory. The love of Christ controls us. What's it mean to be egocentric? If I'm egocentric, what am I? Ego is I, me, centered on me, right? Egocentric is sort of I am in charge of me, I control me, my stuff, my rights, however you want to express it. Paul was that way at one time, right? He talks about all his accomplishments in Judaism and so forth, and there came a time where he threw it all away. What was it that turned Paul? Who did he meet? He met the Lord. He met Christ. So Paul has gone from egocentric, it's all about me, to Christ-centric, Christocentric. It's all about Christ. He's made that shift in his life. And so now what controls him is not himself, but the love of Christ. That's what directs him and controls him. And that ought to be what all of us say. That's what happens when you become a true follower of the Lord. You become about Him, not me. And we're in a me culture. Okay? We're in a total me culture. And so to be Christ-centric, you are a real rebel. And you're overcoming a lot of pressure. The love of Christ controls us because we have concluded this, that one has died for all. Now, I realize these questions are too simple. Who is the one who has died for all? Okay. We've concluded this, that one has died for all. All? All? Does all mean all? Does it mean anybody beyond this room? All. All means all. Yeah, I agree. All means all. One has died for all. That one is Christ. Therefore, all have died. Now, harder question is, what does that mean? One has died for all. We get it. Jesus died on the cross for all. Therefore, all have died. Does all still mean all? So we gotta figure out what that is getting at. Therefore, all have died. Has everybody died to their sin, though? Not everybody. What? Now say that again. Everybody is experiencing, all have sinned, right? Don?
I was going to say the wages of sin is death.
Right? One has died for all, therefore all have died.
I don't think the wages of sin is death is the same all as in this verse.
Okay? That's the all. We're talking just about the church? Is that what you're asking? Well, if that's true, then it's changed since the first half of the phrase. First half was, one has died for all, and we said that all is everybody. And therefore, all have died. That phrase takes some understanding, I think. I don't think the all has switched. but if Jesus really died for everybody, there's at least the potential that everybody has died with him. But you can reject that, you see, right? That's the way I would understand it. Doesn't mean because Jesus went to the cross that everybody's going to be saved. In fact, he said most would not be. But everybody has the potential because he died for all. That's how I would understand. Therefore, all have died in the sense that they have that opportunity to die with Christ.
It's kind of like that scripture that says that your sins are nailed to the cross. Well, before I was a Christian, I mean, I didn't know that.
Uh-huh.
But that's what that represents, is that he died for all sin. So all of us, if we choose, we have to choose that.
Sure. Yeah. It's not proclaiming like a universal salvation. There was a death for all, but there's opportunity for all to be a part of that death. But you have to accept it and do some other things to be a part of that. All have died. Maybe going on a little bit will help us. And he died for all, he's now said that twice, that those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. 3 times he says Jesus died for people, right? Twice he says he died for all, and then at the end, him who died him who for their sake died and was raised. That's Jesus once again. So he suffered death and was raised for all people. But do you see what's between those? That those who live might what? Not live for themselves. That implies that there has to be a change in order to be a part of this. That those who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him. All that starts with, for the love of Christ controls us. And then all of these wonderful phrases to sort of explain the gospel. One died for all. All have died. Those who live no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and was raised for them. That's why I said, I think those 2 verses, if you're looking for verses to memorize and, be able to recall at times when you need reminded, that's a great choice. 2 Corinthians 5, verses 14 and 15.
This reminds me of Galatians 2:20.
You know that verse? You're not going to sing it? I was hoping you'd just break into some. How many know that song? Y'all know that song? Now, why did some people raise their hand like this? Like down here where... How many know that song? Okay. I was born and raised on that song. How many don't know that song? Maybe that's a better question to ask. The one based on Galatians 2:20, I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. I think we need to teach this song. Is it in our songbook here? I know it's in some, it's not in our songbook. You know the song, don't you, Tom? You know the song? Okay. When I was being brought up like in junior worship and stuff, we sang that a lot, and you'd sing at regular speed and then they'd put it on super speed, and we all memorized that verse from that song. If you open to Galatians 2, verse 20, that's the words to it. And I'm not much song leader, but there's 5 or 7 people in here that don't know it, and the rest of us could help them. All right? So the verse begins, I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. The song goes, and those who know it, sing with me. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. Stop. So we didn't quote the rest of the verse yet. So we'll get there. I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loves me and gave himself for me. You see how close that is to these two verses, 2 Corinthians 5? So now we can sing the whole thing. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who and gave himself for me. Great way to memorize a verse. Go to 78. I wonder if I could still do that. I was like 13 when I did that. You want to sing the higher speed? Some people said no. That's the ones that had their hands up here. Okay, let's do it one more time. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life that I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. Now, by next week, I want somebody to write a song for these two verses, 2 Corinthians 5, 14 and 15, and we'll do that one, okay? Can't use the same tune, though. Have to use a different tune. All right, so to wrap this up, based on that, the last couple of verses, how does Jesus' death influence how believers live, according to what's written here? How does Jesus' death influence how believers live? It's not a trick question. It's just right there in the text. Explain that. You're no longer living for yourself. No longer live for themselves, but for him who for their sake died and was raised. You ever wonder, what does Jesus' death have to do with me other than dealing with my sin? Which, that's really, really important. But as far as Sunday to Saturday, I no longer live for myself. It's no longer about me. It's about him. I no longer control me. Not egocentric life. It's Christocentric. It's Christ controls me. The love of Christ controls me. And to the world, they're going to think you're beside yourself. For the most part. Yes?
It makes me go back to Romans 6.
Okay.
Verse 3. You look at, do you not know that all of us have been baptized into Christ, who were baptized into his death, so we're buried therefore with him by baptism, death, in order that just as Jesus was raised from the dead for the glory of God, that we might walk in newness.
Excellent parallel. It's almost like the same person wrote those two. Yeah. Romans and Corinthians. But they go together. You're absolutely right. And we talked about, one has died for all, therefore all have died. What's that mean? All have died how? They're baptized into his death. Right. Absolutely. That's why baptism is right at the heart of the gospel. As old brother, and his name just went out of my mind. Who was the great black evangelist? Marshall Keeble. I ought to be beaten with a noodle for that. Marshall Keeble said, if you take your Bible and go like this, water just pours out of it. Because it's all through It's not the water itself. It's not like magic water, but it's dying. It's dying with Christ, meeting Christ's death in the waters of baptism. All right, folks. Thank you for being a part of class. We will see you next time.